Hey everyone, welcome to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. We're coming to you as always courtesy of our broadcasting partner MoreTalk.tv. This week on the show, we are diving into the never-ending a.r.e. archives with a presentation about those who knew Edgar Cayce. It's a panel discussion. Dr. Harmon Bro hosts this panel discussion about Edgar Cayce with a group of individuals who actually knew him and who had personal readings during their lifetime. The participants include Gladys Davis Turner, who was Edgar Cayce's stenographer, Mae St. and June Bro, the wife of Dr. Harmon Bro, the host. This panel discussion talks about what it was like being present with Edgar as he gave readings, and of course, how Edgar was different in his trance state compared to his awakening state. It also discusses Edgar's hopes and dreams, and of course, so much more. Please enjoy with me our presentation from the archives today with those who knew Edgar Cayce personally. Please enjoy.
Amen. I've been asked to let you know that there is child care available in the lobby, and you can pick your children up if you leave them for child care. You can pick them up in the mini auditorium after the program. My name is Charles Thomas Cayce, and I'd like to welcome you to the first of several winter community gatherings. If you haven't met the folks sitting near you, please do that before you adjourn this afternoon. Part of the purpose of these gatherings is to get to know each other, those of us who live in this area particularly, share experiences, ideas, questions with each other on these Sunday afternoons. Also, a purpose of the gatherings this winter will be to share together a program. This afternoon, that program is very special. I'm going to introduce the moderator of the panel and ask him to introduce the other panelists. Many of you know Dr. Harmon Bro, either as a fellow resident of Virginia Beach or as an instructor of one sort or another at a.r.e. conferences or in college classes somewhere, or perhaps as a therapist, perhaps as a minister. His history with this work spans back many years this time around, and probably many more years at other times. Harmon came here and observed Edgar Cayce give some 500 readings, and based on that study, did his doctoral dissertation at the University of Chicago. Later, he and his wife returned, and I'm told his wife and my mother pushed a child of theirs and myself down the boardwalk years ago, many years ago. That child of theirs is here, Pamela, and is now a minister here in Virginia Beach. She is one of 5 children. Harmon has written many books on the work of Edgar Cayce. My 2 favorites are Dreams in the Life of Prayer and Edgar Cayce on Religion and Psychic Experience. I would recommend all of those books to you. It's a pleasure for me to introduce to you Dr. Harmon Bro.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. Thank you. Boy, I don't know what I'm going to say about these people. I've got so much to say about each one of them that the problem is to choose and then get them talking when you'll find out the most about them. I'm going to keep them talking today till they really say the things that I know are deep within them. Do you know that this is the first time that we four have ever done this? Though we have been good buddies for 41 years and have worked hard, and once Gladys and I shared something like this in Chicago, but this is new for us, as I'm sure it is for you. So we have lots to touch on if we can figure out how to do it. If I speak of Gladys, I suppose my favorite way to speak of her would not be in terms of her accomplishments, though I respect those immensely as Edgar Cayce's secretary and as the keeper of the records and the files and the champion of indexing and good research on that work. I think I would choose to share her with you as someone who pops up in my dreams as a kind of ideal. She's always been that. She is what she talks about. She is a tough lady. I'll tell you that. If you're on the wrong track, you don't want to ignore that when you're around her. But she's as loving and tender and solicitous as perhaps any woman I've ever known when the need is there. And if you don't know her, you must know, looking at the pink she's wearing or whatever that fancy color is, that there's a little girl lives in there along with the grown-up lady, and you can have access to either one depending on what you need. She is somebody deep as we go, I think, from my conversations with her in this enterprise, and at the same time full of mischief. And I expect her to make sly remarks today that are going to make me fall off the platform here. The lady next to her I've known for some lifetimes. My wife, June, now Dr. June Bro, which always kind of awes me, particularly when I know she really knows more about the Bible, for example, than I do now, and some stuff like that. But her experience with Edgar Cayce, obviously, all of ours together won't equal Gladys's, is comprised of working in his office during the last year of his life, and of getting readings, and then all the sharing that went on around the edges. And she's had a lifetime to think about this and to try to pass it on to her children and to make it real in her life. So she has done that partly by taking up theological studies in order to grapple with the readings instead of the musical studies that were foremost in her mind when Edgar Cayce told her, no, don't do that right now, shift over and rear children. Which turned out to be a pretty taxing job in itself. And if I move beyond her to someone, I again have to plead relationship and lack of objectivity because of life readings that said she was my mother once, so I have to treat her with a certain respect. Besides, I just plain like her. I've been working with her. She and I were locked up working in the files for 6 months one time, doing a booklet that never got published. Nothing like that to sober us, is there, Mae? It seems like there are a lot of things we've tried that never quite got done, aren't there? But whenever I have research questions, I can go to her and get her. Gladys will give me the information, and Mae will give me some mischievous approach to the matter, something I've overlooked, some way of structuring it, something like that, that adds to the wonder for me in a very deep and beautiful way. These are the two ladies whom I tell my closest friends, if you want to know this work, be sure while you visit Virginia Beach that you get to know them, for they will represent genuine and important different sides of it that will matter to you. Mae has a deep feeling for biblical faith. Though she was once a Roman, somehow it seemed to have gotten, I think she was, gotten to her that old, rich, fabulous saga of the biblical pilgrimage talks to her, and yet a lively sense of the human condition in all sorts of settings. People who are down and out, people who are wealthy and upper caste, doesn't matter. She's at home with all of them and has her way of cutting through pretense or stuffiness by a sly remark, just as Gladys has. So, all of this is hopelessly inadequate. Mae has worked with this material since the late 30s, right? And I think she first heard about Cayce in New York, although she lived here in Oceana. Is that right? Partly right. Well, there'll be a lot of that today. Partly right. At least it was motivated to get into the work in the late 30s, and was a sparkling part of it while June and I were involved. She'd come riding up on her bicycle and all the sailors whistling from miles around and adding spice and joy to all our days. Anyway, it was and is fun to work with her. Now, what we're going to do today is address some questions together. I labored, and so did Leslie, who invited me, over whether or not to make this an audience participation time, and I decided we would in this way. We'd ask you to think. We want to ask you to think hard with us, but I'm not going to stop and ask you for questions and comments. I want that to be another event with us or somebody else. But there are things to be reconstructed. There are depths and wonders and beauties to be touched. There's holiness to be remembered. And I think we'll do that best and serve you best if we talk among ourselves here, not unmindful of you, but and looking at you, and yet answering and speaking to and with each other. So that's our game plan here for the time that is allotted to us, which is 45 minutes from a few minutes ago. Now, I'd like to suggest that we follow an order like this. I put it on the board. First of all, that our focus today be not on trivia, not on colorful nostalgia, not on what do you know about Cayce that I don't, or something like that, but rather upon the very serious question, how can we each who respond to this work do Cayce in our lives? Not just tell him, not just explain him, not just teach him, but do it. What in his work and in his being has an analog to our lives, such that we get a sense of what is asked of us if we pay him the highest tribute we can, which is to be in our lives what he was in his. That's where I'm headed today with these folks. But to do it, we have to find out a couple of things. One, how did he do his work? What was he about? What were the risks he took? How did he feel about it? How did we feel about it? What was the reading process? So I'm going to kick off there. And this is fun to talk about. We could go on all day. The last time I did it with Gladys, they had to drag us off the podium, because there are things that we remember that don't pop up all the time. Mae said today there'll be things here that won't come out any other place, and I think she's right. So I would like to look at a whole range of questions, including how we felt Cayce was the same or different when he was in trance as when he was awake, how we felt going into that reading room and when we left it, and at the end of a reading. And here's a mischievous one, what we might most have liked to change about the reading process if we could. Gladys might have liked the punctuation change, but if there was anything, I wanted to have the attitude of those who sought readings change somehow if I could. I even wrote a booklet on the physical readings to do that. Each of us has maybe something that you can remember straining at you. How can we improve this? And I'm going to ask them, if I get a chance, or at least I may, out of a whole list of questions here, things like, how do the readings vary from day to day? And what did you think we could do about it to make them better at times? Or what did you try to do? And questions that have to do with how Cayce thought about the process himself, and how we felt with the pressure that mounted up, at least when we were together, with the tremendous requests that were coming in. And I suppose I have the question often, how might we have helped him better? What have we learned from a journey with someone like this about helping each other on our journeys and with our potential? Well, these are issues about his reading process, and they include questions of many kinds that I think we want to feel free to bring up. Like, how did you feel when you were getting your own reading? How did it feel sitting there in the room when you were being held up and talked about? Just what went through you at such a time? Then I want, on that foundation, to look at the question, what kind of a man was this, and the people that were around him and the commitments he had. What were his greatest dreams as you thought you saw them? How did he handle failures, like the loss of his hospital and people that turned away? And what did it mean to join in his work? I know I was just there a short time, and Mae said to me, you must expect to be tested. Just like that. I mean, I just got there, and she already said, you must expect to be tested. What kinds of feelings did you have about entering into this man's life? Questions about what it cost him to do this work, way down inside, and where he drew reassurance in spite of the strangeness and the uncertainty. Questions about the dangers. You've heard Mae say on the movie about his life, at the very end, something about a man who laid down his life again and again and again. If that was so, what was that like? And how did it feel to be with him when a man was risking his life in a process we all take for granted? Questions like this: what did he care most about? What were his final commitments? And some more practical questions like what were all those photos doing on the wall, and why was it Nefertiti on the filing cabinet in his study and not somebody else, and other goodies like that. So here we go, folks, and I want to ask you to focus primarily first on the reading process for a little while, and then with that in mind, you probably need to put that around your neck, Gladys. We're always putting something on your neck. Have you noticed that? It's been quite a long time. Then after we've looked at the reading process together, we'll shift over more and more to questions about the man who was giving them, the process from a human side that we were all involved in, and some of the perspectives we've gained over the years. Just as we start, I'm going to ask my panel to settle in and step back with me to some of Cayce's birthday parties in January and March. It was his birthday, but also the celebrations. I'm sorry about that were held often with the study group and Hannah Miller's Bread and people that came from out of town, the Dillmans, the Seas, the Secrets, others, and those that he cherished and struggled with, David and Lucille, Con, the Chagrues, and the intimate circle of the family and all the struggles that were there with, and the hopes and dreams, Hugh Lynn and Edgar Evans and Gertrude cooking in the kitchen and meals around the table. Go back with me to as primary a sense as you can of what really happened, who was really there. Be there when Cayce was teaching the Bible, and perhaps with him when he was in church, and when he prayed. How did you feel when he opened his mouth and started to pray there in the office? Step back behind all the years of interpretation and publication and everything else, and just stand there in the real immediacy of what was going on. Now, let's begin with the reading process. And ask you, any of you, for comments on some practical things. One of them is, what were all those photographs doing on his wall? What do you think that meant to him? They were all over the wall, behind and beside his couch where he gave readings, weren't they? Stuck on there, and I don't remember them as being studio portraits, most of them either. What do you think? Why did he put those where he lay down to give his readings? What were these people doing there? Gladys, you watched these the longest. How do you feel about those photographs? You remember them well, don't you?
Yes, I do, and I remember when he first started calling them in from people back in 1923 when I went to work for him. He had just set up his little studio, not studio, his little office, and he was writing people about it, and he wanted to get a picture of all of his friends that he thought a lot of, and to have them around him in his little study. And all through the years, he would ask people for their photograph, and that little room was what we call the reading room, was filled with pictures, and we still have those pictures. If we ever reproduce that little room, which we might do someday, Hugh Lynn said we might.
Might do it for a movie.
We could use those.
Did you have the feeling, here's a more serious question, that when Cayce took you on, I know Gladys' story is a little different from the rest of us, so when he took people on, not only when they got readings, but when they spent time with him and when he wrote to them and so on, that you were held by him and by Gertrude in some sense the same as those photographs, that he was faithful to people that he took up into his round of life, that he prayed for them and wrote to them and wondered about them, and not just went by them casually. They were not just constituents or consumers for him. And Mae, do you have some feeling about what it meant to be kind of taken up into his circle, how real that was? What can you say about that? I know that's hard.
In the circle of the home?
And the circle of his heart in some way.
Okay. I hadn't anticipated this question, Harmon, but when I think in terms of my experience there in the home, and I was there quite often, I've often said they couldn't get rid of me because I was there almost daily for quite a number of months and years. And what I felt there was different than anything I'd ever felt in any home, and I couldn't describe it. so that the reading room had that special quality and more. It had for me, it has for me now memories of how I felt differently many times when I was listening to readings, or when readings were being given for me. And this whole atmosphere in the home took me a long time to get used to the fact that he never criticized anyone. He never answered a question, never told you anything if you didn't ask him the question. He was joyous, and the home was embracing in a way that's very difficult to describe. I don't know how to say anything too particular.
That's a good comment.
Unless you make it more
specific, right? Part, certainly, of the experience of being taken up into that household and into his circle of friends that were on those photographs was a sense of being looked out for.
Indeed.
Is that right? That if anything happened to you, you could get a reading, there would be, or you get prayer, you could get help, that you were into a circle of love that was real, that would be undergirding in some way.
I came to notice that there was a special relationship with every person that came in there. And it was between Mr. Cayce and that person. It was personal, it was different, it had a different feeling. It brought out something that I had not noticed before. This was a fascinating
It was different for each of us, wasn't it?
Each one.
Junie, you remember your encounter with him and the awe I know that you felt as a young bride.
I was just 23, and so there was awe and some fear and a lot of respect, and then of course that grew into love. But he treated me as a real human being, and he would take me out and show me where the fairies were, which I never saw. And
under these are garden fairies under the bushes.
Right, and when we traveled to New York toward the end of his life, when he was quite ill, he told us stories. He took time with us to share his life, and I felt included. And of course, Gertrude was part of that too. I felt that her arms were open, and she was right there for people. And of course, Gladys with her blonde braids around her head, and Mae with her gardenia in her hair. I felt very much included, even though I was very, very young.
So each of us had a different sense of how we belonged to or fitted into the work that was being done there and where it meant. I think Mae is probably correct that she didn't get orders and told things, and I felt I did oftentimes and bristled, but it partly was the spirits we brought, I think, and the maybe the difference in sexes and things like that. Certainly this was a man who varied somewhat from day to day and week to week as we experienced him. Let's go back to that reading process. How did you feel when you walked into the room? Just before the door closed. And my memory is the parrot shut up oftentimes, too. Is that right, Gladys?
Put a cover over his cage.
Oh, put a cover. That'll help. Probably should have done that to some of the rest of us. How'd you feel when you went into that room? Nowadays we think of going for a psychic reading as something conventional and something psychic does just like any other profession, just sits down and does it or lies down. But for me, there was always a sense of awe and excitement. Well, what was it for you? I can start with any one of you. Gladys, you got a nice look in your eye, and there are so many, it must be hard for you to generalize. But in general, when you walked in that room with you, she had a little steno pad, sat down in a chair with a little sort of table. Was it on one leg?
No,
a couple of legs?
It was a four-legged table.
Four-legged. I couldn't remember that sat in front of you. I can remember how it was poised there. I thought she was floating somewhere. You were often joyous, as you are now, often in good spirits, more often than not. Even when we were hassled, I felt you were in good spirits.
Right.
You made a point of it. Is that right, when you entered the room?
Yes, we were supposed to be in a prayerful attitude, when we were going in for a reading and during that whole time, and be in an attitude of prayer and seeking help, the very best that could be obtained for any person seeking.
It's almost like stepping into a chapel then, for us, even though it's an ordinary study. There was that as you step in. This is dead serious. This means a lot to all of us. Somebody's life is at hand here, and we're going to make this the very best we can. Is that right? Did you have a sense of being a participant in this process, or just an onlooker?
Participant always.
So that it was a string quartet with all of those playing in the room, and not only the man on the couch, in some sense, and the seeker, right?
Right.
And it felt like that, too. That this is a joint creation in some way, in the spirit of the seeker. You could sense in the questions.
Right.
And in the way he answered them, too, you could sense, this one is serious. He sees something here.
Right.
And others, it seemed more straightforward and just going on through it. But there was some electricity of expectation, wasn't there?
Yes.
Always.
Yes.
And soberness, too. May, you want to comment on that feeling of going in the room?
Well, you see, the first time I ever went in that room, I was desperate. And I mean really desperate. I didn't know what to expect. I was afraid. And all of those things. And then Mr. Cayce, and then I saw the whole happening. Nobody told me to be quiet and pray or thoughtful or anything. We just trailed in with them. And Mr. Cayce started talking, and I didn't understand him. And then finally he said something that made me know that he couldn't have known this particular fact. And I, again, was on the alert. I went in feeling as though I could hardly carry the burden on my back, and I went out of the room feeling that everything was fine. And I cannot explain that, but I went immediately to the phone, called my mother, and told her everything. I hadn't done anything yet. I said, Mother, everything is going to be all right.
Let's go to that moment of leaving the room for all of us, not only when we had our own readings, but also when we'd been hearing readings for other people. As you stepped out of that room, I can see you going to your office with all those notes you had to transcribe, or in that rush time you had to dictate them to Gene Fitch or something like that. There were so many readings. But that moment, that pause, I loved looking at your face just at the end of a reading before we even left. The quietness and the composure and the thoughtfulness that often was upon us. Am I right about that? Almost like you didn't want to leave the room. Is that right?
Right.
And as something good, and you might say a blessing, had gone on. Is that correct? Even if we didn't understand how all the patterns of healing would work out, whether the person was going to work with them or not, all those uncertainties. And yet there was a spirit we had been visited or blessed or met in some very special way. Is that true?
Yes.
And when you walk out and look back, what thoughts would occur to you sometimes? Let me start with you, Gladys. As you walk out of that room after a reading session, as to what this really meant in human lives and in our lives.
So many times it was like listening to a beautiful sermon, you know. In fact, I heard more beautiful things in a reading than I ever did in a sermon.
Two of us up here are preachers. You know where that went. She's right. And so there was beauty, and it was even an awesome beauty, wasn't it? It had to bring tears to your eyes.
Yes.
I know, because I've wept and watched you weep,
Mm.
just in a passage of love or insight or elevation or some way of glorifying God that just got to you.
Yes.
And you'd sit there, and tears going down your eyes, face sometimes from it. But as you look back at the process and say, what's going on in there? What did you give thanks for that had transpired? What was the nature of this event in the human family? That's hard to put words to.
I always felt like it was just a great blessing to be there and to have that opportunity of listening to words of truth. That's the way I felt about it. Of just like you had an inside track, you know, to the things you wouldn't have had otherwise.
And that sense of truth came from a kind of immediacy in the way it took hold of you, that this is right, this is in balance, right? That this fits with centuries of spiritual pilgrimage, that this has a depth and a character about it, and a demand on people, too.
Yes, yes.
Let me ask whether any of you felt, in listening to readings, some sense of danger. Did you ever feel there was a possibility of rebuke or of being quietly exposed or in any way threatened by the readings? I see Mae looking very sober. June, I doubt that it happened to her very often because she was so joyous. June?
Well, certainly I had apprehension when I sat there waiting for my reading. Mae had helped me work out some questions, and but I more and more I got the sense, my God, there's someone or some force that knows me all the way through, It was very humbling, and it was very moving, and it rekindled my whole feeling about God. But even now, I can pick up a reading. I don't care if it's a physical reading or a economic affairs reading or a world affairs reading, whatever, and I can get that same sense of, somebody was in touch with truth here. The same thing you felt.
And was the truth that was of the character of love, that cherished each one of us, that picked up our lives with infinite tenderness, spoke to us as though we really were known. Is that right?
Really known.
More perhaps than any other time except prayer, away from that room. That sense, I am known and I am loved in some way. For me, there was also threat in the sense that I felt gaps and lacks and weaknesses in my life, even young as I was. It's gotten worse as the years have gone by. I wouldn't want to get a reading now without a lot of fasting. But including one experience we all had with what seemed to be Michael, which was pretty unpleasant, in the way of being chewed out. There was also that element. I see Mae laughing because she recalls how startling and unpleasant I was. There was also that element of risk, was there not, that if you came before this consciousness, you couldn't fake it, and there's no use trying.
Oh, Harmon, come on. Let's get this thing a little bit lighter. I didn't feel all of this great reverence. I felt excitement and challenge and wonderment and all the things that made me come alive and made me confident when I shouldn't have been.
That's a good comment. That's a good comment.
With such confidence, I stood on the street corner and talked about Mr. Cayce and wanted everybody to listen to me. Then my family, half of them would leave home when they saw me coming. And that was because they knew I didn't know what I was talking about, and I was fairly certain that I did. Now this is really how I felt. I didn't. I felt many things at different times. As time went on, I felt different things at different readings. But always there was something so exhilarating about being in this room and hearing this information, most of which I couldn't fathom.
And yet
about my own life reading, about my own readings.
Yeah. Always that sense of adventure that you spoke about.
Yes,
this is
goodness.
Important. It's going somewhere. It's worth helping.
Indeed.
And who knows the end of it in some way, where it's all going.
I went blithely on helping everybody whether they wanted to be helped or not.
That's the kind of realism I've always cherished in her. Always cherished.
Got in trouble.
While we're asking about the spirit of the enterprise, let me ask a tough question I've never heard asked in public before. And this shifts a little bit to the man now. What do you think were his greatest dreams for this work? I've never asked anybody that question that knew him well. Way, way down, what did he want to have happen? Keeping going was a lot, just a whole lot, and his attention went primarily there. But if you stepped back and you were riding in a car with him or having supper with him or caught him in the garden when he was working and you asked him, where do you want to have all this go? Where is it supposed to, not only you, but where do you think it's supposed to come out? What might he say at that point? What were his dearest dreams about this work? We know early it was the hospital. Toward the end of his life, what would you say? Gladys, you want to take a pass at that one? I've never asked you that.
So many times he would say that he just wanted to help people. In the beginning, he wanted to help people,
right.
And especially children,
Right.
And he always had that special need to help children, and he had to be convinced over and over again that he was helping people, because he couldn't have gone on.
Many of us don't know that about him today, do we? We think he just did it, and that was. I gave another reading today.
He had to be assured constantly.
Right, and we had to do that. That was part of our love for him, to remind him of this all the time, particularly about the readings, the things he did when he was conscious and psychic, he could do like that. But the things when he gave unconscious, he had to be reassured, didn't he?
Yes.
And it was sometimes, to me, touching, even sad to see the need or the wistfulness on his face that said, did I do all right? Was it, or didn't say anything, but you could feel it. Is that
he
right?
had to know that the readings were helping people, and those around him, he had to know that it was worthwhile in their lives, because that was the only way he could tell whether it was helping or not.
By the people.
Because he didn't hear a reading, you see, and we got our inspiration and help through just listening to the readings for other people as well as our own readings. But he never heard one.
So then what was the equivalent for him of the readings that we heard? Where did he draw his strength, his joy, his adventure, his challenge? But he never heard
from
a
the
reading.
Reports from people, when they would write back and come and tell him, how they'd been helped.
Right.
And it would give him courage to go on.
And he'd peck it out on his typewriter and thank him, wouldn't he? Or...
in the last days when we were all so busy, Ed Evans had given him a little portable typewriter, and he would peck it out on, letters. And Elsa Seacrest, Elsa and Bill have a lot of letters that they got from him. And Mr. Cayce called her Mrs. Seacrest, and she said, call me. Says, don't call me Mrs. Seacrest. And he said, well, what should I call her? She said, just call me me. I'm me, And so he would write letters to her, dear me. She gave me some of the original letters that he pecked out on the typewriter. I have them up there in the archives.
Now that leads to a question I raised earlier, and I'll let that one go by about his ultimate dreams. Maybe we'll come back to it. Which is the closeness or the gap between the man unconscious in trance, giving a reading, and the man out in normal consciousness. When did you feel that he was closest, when he was awake, to the same figure you were hearing and responding to on the couch? Were there times when you could say, whoops, that's so close it's a breath apart? There were for me.
Oh, yes.
Maybe I'll ask each of you about that. Well, let me come back to Gladys. Were there times when you looked at him and said, this guy now is very close? When, for example, he's talking to someone alone in his office and really sharing or counseling, or maybe some other place.
As compared with during the reading?
Yes.
I would speak for myself in this matter.
Don't
hear anybody else comment on that. When he was giving a reading, my greatest concern was for him. I was so concerned about his waking up, and for a long time I didn't understand this. I knew that he could have gone on. I had learned that much from conversation in the home.
She means died.
Died, passed on, whatever you want to call it. And I felt such concern, particularly if he was giving a reading for me, that he would get finished. I want him to hurry, get finished, and wake up. Now, when I sat and talked with him in his home, I bared my soul to him. And I cannot tell you his answers, but I came back the next day after I'd tried doing what he said. These are things that had to do with my problems, personal problems. And I would report to him, and now, what do I do now? I've done that.
You're talking about Cayce awake,
Mr.
too.
Cayce awake. Now, in the giving of the reading, that was an entirely different experience for me. Again, the wonderment, the beauty of it, the promise in it, the excitement of the possibility of changes, whether they were physical or in the lives of others, the explanations of why, the many whys that I had in my questions in my mind about why this, where did I come from, what's the soul, what am I doing here, what am I supposed to do about this?
She's a why person. You can see why she's been in research all these years.
And these answers were coming through these readings, and they would elude me. I'd get the answer and I couldn't hold it. Couldn't hold it in my mind. And I'd go back. Remember now that Gladys is from the beginning. I came in 38, Harmon came in the 40s, and when we speak, I think we'll keep this in mind. We'll understand a little bit better the information that's being related here.
Right.
So over a period of time, from 1938 up until the end of Mr. Cayce's life, I had a range of experiences that it would take me endless time to talk about.
Let me switch to June and ask if there were times when you made in your mind some comparison between the waking Cayce and the, if you will, sleeping one, or the one giving counsel.
Well, I can remember the first Congress that I went to, and there were people that had gathered. We were a group of us sitting in that passageway, near the library and the way to the kitchen or the living room. And I remember Mr. Cayce just walking through and just looking at us and starting to read auras. And, there was humor in it, and a lightness and a beauty in it. And I got the same feeling as I did at my reading. My gosh, whatever he's in touch with sees right through these people. And whatever he saw and shared was always helpful. It didn't put people down or, put them up. It was just a kind of honest, open, lovely sharing that he did around that little group.
Some of it humorous, right?
Oh, yes.
Reading auras. You wonder when you look down and see if you could see your own aura after he did, because you didn't know what he was seeing.
And, of course, I loved his Tuesday evening Bible study groups, too. That meant so much.
I think I would nominate that. As he prepared for the Bible study, as he did it, and afterwards, I found in his face a serenity and a depth and a quiet and a richness that brought him, for me, very, very close to that figure on the couch. What would you say? This question is not an idle question, because many of us think about the readings as something done out there, and obviously we have nothing to do with that because we don't give readings, but maybe it's just one life, lived in different settings in different ways, and for all of us we have to ask, what are the precious qualities of being fully alive that were most exemplified in him, unconscious or conscious? When did you find any parallels between the waking man and the man on the couch?
Well, I think in his Sunday school classes and in his teaching, in that weekly Bible class, he came pretty close to it. Of course, he was to the feeling I had in the readings, because they quoted the Bible too. But he was just a natural-born minister. Awake and
with a pastoral sense, with a sense of the tradition that he wanted to share. There's a question related to this now, and that is, how rich and deep a man was this? How much stature? And sometimes in Chagru's book, I think accidentally, he's portrayed as a kind of a well-meaning nobody to whom this remarkable thing happened. It makes a better story. But, as a matter of fact, it might not be fully accurate, that this may have been an extremely rich and man of great size of personhood. Each of us has different views of this. As one reading said, each person will see this man differently. Nevertheless, I think that's worth addressing, because in it may lie some secrets of where gifts come from. Do they come to us primarily when we are simple-minded, nice people, or do they come when we have put everything we have on the line in lifetime after lifetime and then become vessels that can handle this? Do you want to comment about what you felt as to this? Let me start with you, Gladys, the strength and stature of this man. Can you say something about that? Was he a simple-minded person, or was he complex?
Complex, very complex.
Very. Breathing on that up here very quickly. Often we're not quite sure which Edgar Cayce you were going to get.
Right, but he did downgrade himself constantly and talk about when he was when he was a boy, and as he grew up, and he felt like a freak. I think that's where they got that title for that
New York play.
And because he said he felt like a freak because there was nobody else like him. They'd think he was doing all these strange things, and like repeating the what president was that? Or somebody.
A political speech that he memorized?
Yes, he memorized.
By sleeping on it?
Yeah.
So he was strange as he grew up, wasn't he?
Some of his father sort of, when he was with his father when this first happened, with his spelling lesson, and so he was fascinated by it, Mr. L.B., and he would show him off, doing these things, and he just felt, I guess the other people around him, his friends, his own age, they probably weren't comfortable with him either, with him doing that.
I've talked to some of them about it. Then, with that sense of being strange, and some of that he told humorously, didn't he, to make you laugh?
Yes.
How did he keep from thinking of himself and presenting himself as somebody very, very important, as somebody very, very impressive? By and large, he didn't present himself that way.
No, not except when he was talking about the Bible. Then I think that stood out, because he felt sure, of the Bible. I mean, that was what he... I'm
glad to hear you say that, because I remember those Bible classes where he spoke, I thought, with a lot of authority.
Yes.
And I just out of seminary, and I thought, whoops, that's not the way I learned it. But it didn't stop him.
No.
The only person I ever saw stop him when he was being very authoritative was Gertrude sometimes. He didn't want to, in a way, when he was on a roll, right?
No.
You felt there was something really serious here.
Right.
And worth listening to.
Yeah.
But you're right, he was less modest than, maybe more modest about his psychic ability than he was his Bible teaching.
Yes, he was.
That's interesting. Do you think he chose to be modest? That inside there were conflicting currents, and some Rata currents and some Yult, and that in some important, deep way he chose to limit himself and to say, I don't know, I don't have the answers, as he did in everything he wrote about himself. Was that a sole choice? Was it just a gimmick? Was it his real being making that choice? Many of us now, if he were here, would fall all over him, and yet he genuinely held back, it seemed to me, with a spirit of modesty that impresses me the more I get into publicizing him, and I did that year too. The more stunned I am at his immense modesty. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely.
It was really very there, modest. And he meant it.
Right.
And didn't make claims for himself. Yet at the same time, would it be fair to say that he knew in some deep level of himself that he was one of a kind? That he had stature, that he mattered?
Yeah, well, he was sure he mattered with God. I mean, he never doubted that. I mean,
So that was almost then maybe, we're coming toward the end of our time, the first relationship in his life, would it be fair to say it was, in some sense, his relationship with God?
I think so, absolutely.
If you're going to say to somebody, if you want to know this man, be sure you know this. Find this out. What would you say? Would you say that relationship with God was as near the center as you could get?
I think so.
And June, was that your experience? And Mae, what do you think?
Well, he seemed a whole lot more in charge than folks thought.
He was more in charge.
Yes. And where he was, and what he was dealing with. What he was dealing with. And he saw and he knew things that he couldn't share with you.
Or you certainly felt that way. Well, I think it's probably true, too.
And true, that he didn't... this is the way I saw him. I always knew this, the last 7 years of his life now. This is the twilight years of his life, and this was the time when he was mellow and gentle and accepting and loving and all of the things that maybe he wasn't as a young man. I don't know.
Or had the struggle
But he certainly was there in this capacity when I knew him. And I remember him talking with a couple of men that came to see him, and Gladys would know their names. They were metallurgists. And he sat there and talked with them just as though he were a metallurgist.
So
and I thought, how come he didn't tell me these things? I mean, why was he sitting back? And I never heard this before. He came forth with as much knowledge and exchange with them.
Came quickly, too, didn't it?
Very quickly.
I don't remember very often in the end of his life seeing him study readings. Early he must have.
He never poured over the readings.
That's what I thought.
No, he in the first days there in Dayton, Ohio, he would when we first began to get the life readings, he would have her read aloud, the reading, and sometimes he would we'd get a reading to interpret a reading, and we didn't understand it. And he'd say sometimes he said the interpretation is worse than the original.
That didn't mean that he ignored the readings.
No, it was just strange to him. He didn't really understand it.
sometimes I felt when after a reading was over, he picked up the reading and held it. I sometimes wondered if he did a little, some kind of clairvoyance there, because he jumped into the discussion fairly quickly of somebody's reading.
I think he would, if you'd ask him questions and we'd discuss it, I think he would get an inkling about it and then talk to us. It may be like this, you know.
Where did he turn that was most helpful to him? If your memory is like mine, you remember some days and it's more difficult than other days. Douglas has written about this in a book, so I'm not telling tales out of school. Some days we didn't quite know how to approach him, didn't know what would come of it, or when the rest of us were upset, under pressure, and that would get him upset. But there were some things you knew that if he was into it or doing it, it would give sweetness and depth to his spirit. I counted his prayer time and his Bible time as pretty central to that.
Yes.
Somebody's need was another one. What would you name that brought him to his center very quickly that you saw?
That question directed at me?
Go ahead, Mae.
A little child.
A little child.
I saw this and the beauty of him holding out his hands to a youngster who could barely toddle toward him. And he knew who the youngster was, and he often knew who people were and never commented on it. That is, past relationships when they had crossed paths. But this particular, the child looked all around the room. There were many people there, maybe as many as 15. And it was Jerry. And Jerry was trying to decide, where to go. They had put him down at the entrance to the room. And Jerry looked around the room and held out his arms to Mr. Cayce. Well, the laughter, the joy that he expressed in that moment was fantastic. It was not mystical, it was sheer joy. He picked the youngster up, and I would say these were the beautiful times for him.
Beautiful, exactly right.
Acknowledged by a soul which had just happened to be a son of his in another lifetime.
So Mae is describing not only his chosen manner and his inner stature, but a sense of the imposing qualities about the man that I think we all felt at times. This is someone who sees and sees deeply. I was afraid to speak sometimes, or to think even, particularly with profanity, when I was standing right by him. This is someone who sees a lot of you, wide awake, and someone who carries a burden, a vision, not always a joyous one, of seeing what people are about, where they're from, and where they're going. So that along with the modesty and the simplicity and the quiet, there was also this bearing in the man. Is that correct? June and I experienced him that way in New York, at restaurants and with taxi cabs. He had bearing, didn't he, Gladys, in public settings? He carried himself...
absolutely.
Someone of stature, and people experienced him that way?
Yes.
It was a strange combination of a quietness and a Sunday school teacher on the one hand, and somebody who could have been Rata or something like that.
And he could change very quickly from being just, he looked so tired and worn out, and then all of a sudden something would happen and he would just change into another, just like he was another person. I remember he came down the stairs all ready to go to a lecture in Norfolk, and he had been ill there for 3 or 4 days, and Miss Cayce said to him, "Well, Edgar, just 30 minutes ago you looked like something the cat drug in, and now you look like a different person. He was all dressed up, and."
So when we speak about him as an extremist, we mean it, don't we? That the opposites were there. We're coming toward the end, but let's make a comment.
I'd like this one comment. If you could meet a person and see that you had known them 3 or 4 other incarnations, and all of these emotions from that sweeping up for you to consider and deal with, can you imagine what that would be like with every person that you met? And this he could do. Not with every person, but for many of the people who came his way, he could see and would know where he had been associated with them before. Aside from the personal attention that they might be getting, he had this capacity and often had to choose how to react so it would seem real to the individual. And I was astounded when he when I went in for my life reading, Gladys, maybe you heard this. He said, Mae, I can tell you where we were associated before, you know.
Before he gave the reading?
Before he gave the reading. And I was new at this. I'd just been into this for 3 or 4 months. And I was, very excited about this. And he told me where it would be, that I have been acquainted with you before. And that just fired my imagination, which means that I was not the only person that ever happened with. It happened with almost anyone that he met if he had been associated with him before.
You've created some of the sense of awe in meeting him.
You bet, and he had to deal with all of this coming at him. This is why I think that he wanted to spend a lot of time alone, and that he didn't go to visit anybody. That people came to him fine.
And why he told stories a lot.
Why he told stories when they came. But can you imagine meeting a person and seeing all of the array of interaction with that soul in another lifetime, what this would require of you?
Let me ask a closing question here, and we're already over the time and we'll quit. Mr. Cayce liked to give those Sunday afternoon lectures during the period the hospital was in operation. It must have been tremendously exciting for him. It's live stream and good people around, and Morton growing and Hugh Lynn growing and Tom Shagru putting out a magazine. Gosh, those must have been exciting times. But he liked those Sunday afternoon sessions. When he spoke, and he and Morton alternated at times, didn't they? If he had come here today for a Sunday afternoon session, and he were to speak to us thoughtfully about what he wanted of us, who had given attention and respect and thoughtfulness to his work, what do you think this man, and he was good and he was deep when he spoke, what might he say to us from out of his heart today? And he would call us friends, and he would speak very directly and simply with no notes. What might he encourage us in, or ask of us, or in some way share with us, speaking to friends, many of whom he did not know in that lifetime? Want to take a crack at that? That's a maybe game, but let's see if we can put that in some perspective, because it will catch some of the spirit of the man if we can do it. Junie, you want to try what you think he might want to say to us?
Well, I guess I remember him like Gladys does as being a lot of minister. And I think that he would remind us of our relationship to the Christ, and encourage us to be part of small groups where you could really share your spiritual growth.
Because that was his big adventure in the work after the hospital, wasn't it? The small group effort. Mae, do you want to try something that you think he might share with us if he were standing here quiet and composed?
Individually or?
No. Speaking in a group, to a group. What spirit?
Oh, fantastic. Just fantastic, because he could draw on a source of knowing what to say that would answer to everybody. He had this talent, and it was done in a very simple fashion, not with fancy words, but it was projected in a way that everyone would think that he was talking to them.
So he would he would tell some stories.
In the simplest fashion, and very gentle about the whole thing, and not dramatic at all.
But there would be some invitation involved in it, wouldn't there?
Some contact with every person.
Take some risk.
They would respond, and they would feel that he was talking to them. I've heard him do this many times. At least I thought he was doing it. You have to understand that I only knew him the last 7 years of his life.
Right.
And you could say that would be the twilight years of his life. And he was very mellow and very loving and very sensitive.
Yep.
Very sensitive. Super sensitive.
From that feeling, here's somebody really paying attention to the people.
Indeed.
Gladys, give you the chance to pull this together, because you can do that.
At the Cayce Hospital, people would come, the whole families would come. If they had one member of the family in the hospital, they'd come maybe over the weekend and spend time there. And there were several Jews there always, and I remember the different ones, he would ask them what they wanted him to talk about, and And I remember this lady, Mrs. Rome, R-O-M-E, she and her husband and their daughter all had readings. And so she went and got the Bible and brought it to him, wanted to talk about that.
And he would,
and he
wouldn't
would,
he?
yeah.
And he might today.
Yeah, right.
That sense in which he was grounded in and lived in and from that whole magnificent, crazy pilgrimage of the Bible is a framework where you have to put him, don't you?
Right.
He loved it and trusted it, challenged it,
Right.
let it challenge him, and he offered it
Right.
to people, didn't he?
Right.
And sometimes in our busyness of studying this and that, we sometimes don't get back to that, do we?
No.
Well, I want to thank the panel for having shared from their hearts, as I can see their eyes, as you can.
Hope everyone enjoyed our presentation from the archives today with those who knew Edgar Cayce personally and got readings from him. Please stay tuned. We're lining up some great new interviews for the upcoming weeks. And on behalf of everyone here at the Association for Research and Enlightenment and moretalk.tv, thank you so much for spending time with us this week. On a more personal note, I want to thank everyone throughout the country and the world for their continued support as Orlando residents like myself struggle to make sense of what's happening and what is most important right now for all the planet's people. I encourage everyone to put in the time to educate themselves and wake up to what's happening right now on a global scale and how it's playing out in your own personal life. No one is separate from the events that are taking place around us, and knowledge is the absolute foundation needed to increase our quality of living and make lasting change here. I'm so thankful for what this world and its people have given me, and I intend to never stop giving back. I hope you will too. Thanks for tuning in to our program, Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. I hope everyone has a wonderfully enlightened week, and I'll see you next week. Much love.